I was just 18 when my entire world imploded, thanks to one lie that came out of my cousin's mouth. 3 years later, she's on her deathbed, and the truth has finally come crawling into the daylight like a roach. But back then, no one wanted to hear it, especially not my own parents. Let me take you back. My cousin, let's call her Tessa, was 4 years older than me. We used to be close when we were kids, but once we hit high school, that bond started fading. She was the daughter of my mom's younger brother, Uncle Ray. He was a single dad, and honestly, one of the most straight-laced, no-nonsense men I've ever known. His wife bailed when Tessa was little, ran off with some guy she met at work, and never looked back. Ray raised Tessa on his own, and everyone in the family praised him like he was some kind of saint. And, in a way, he was. He never dated again, never remarried. His entire life was built around giving Tessa the best he could. He worked his butt off, even started a college fund for her. But once she turned 22 and finished her undergrad, she wanted to keep going masters, PhD, the whole academic buffet. Ray put his foot down. He told her, "I've done my part. If you want to keep studying, that's on you now." He wasn't wrong. At 22, she was more than capable of working and studying like the rest of us. But Tessa didn't see it that way. She thought she deserved to be supported until she decided she was done learning, or until the money ran out, whichever came first. The fights between them got ugly. And guess where she always ran when they clashed? Our house. My mom would always listen to her side of the story like she was the second coming of Mother Teresa. Me? I kept my mouth shut most of the time, but I always felt like Ray was being reasonable. Then came the day everything changed. I was home alone, can't remember if my parents were out at a dinner or some family event, but I was definitely flying solo. Tessa showed up unannounced, like she often did, and when I told her my mom wasn't there, I expected her to leave. Instead, she flopped onto the couch like she owned the place. "I just need to be away from my dad right now," she muttered. I didn't argue. I just went back to my room, figuring she'd chill out and leave soon. But no, she started venting, loudly. I'd heard her rant a dozen times before, but this time, she turned the volume to 11. Eventually, I snapped. I told her the truth. "Tessa," I said, "maybe your dad isn't the villain. He raised you alone. He put you through undergrad. Now you want more, and you think it's his job to keep funding you? That's not how life works. You're grown. Get a job." She went silent. Her expression flipped from frustration to something else, rage. Pure, red, hot rage. "You don't get it," she hissed. "You're just some spoiled little brat who's had everything handed to you. You think you're better than me?" Before I could even respond, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I thought that was the end of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, my parents woke me up like the house was on fire. "Get downstairs," my dad barked. Now, Tessa and Uncle Ray were there. Tessa was crying no, sobbing as if she'd just escaped a horror movie. Ray looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. My mom was pale. My dad wouldn't even look me in the eye. Then it hit. Tessa claimed I had hurt her, that I had touched her when she came over the night before. She said I took advantage of her vulnerability and violated her trust. And somehow, she made it sound believable. I froze. My brain short-circuited. "What?" I stammered. "That's not true. I didn't." But no one was listening. Not one damn person. Ray said she came home in tears, inconsolable. And after a while, she finally told him what I did. My dad turned to me and said, "We saw the footage. We know she came here last night. We know she ran out crying. That was all the evidence they needed. No one asked for my side. No one wanted it. My parents didn't even let me speak before they begged Ray not to call the police." I was standing there, silent, as they negotiated behind my back, like I wasn't even in the room. I was livid. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a decorative vase, and smashed it against the wall, just to get their attention. It didn't help. My dad dragged me upstairs, locked me in my room like I was some criminal, and told me to stay there until Tessa and Ray were gone. When he came back, I was crying, furious, helpless. "I didn't do it," I whispered. He didn't care. They agreed not to press charges. "But you're leaving." Just like that, I was exiled. Shipped off to live with Great Uncle Hank in the middle of nowhere. Hank was a miserable old man with a temper like a firecracker and zero patience. My dad knew I hated him. That was the point. To make things worse, my parents told Tessa they'd give her my college fund. Every last cent. They said it was a show of good faith. I protested, begged them to believe me. Nothing worked. I wasn't just cut off financially, I was cut out of their lives. Phone gone. Social media wiped. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just me, a suitcase, and a one-way trip to isolation. The worst part? I knew she lied, and I knew why. Tessa wasn't just mad at me. She saw an opportunity. By throwing me under the bus, she not only deflected attention from her own mess, but also secured funding from my parents when her own dad refused to help her anymore. It was calculated, cold, brilliant in a twisted way, but it destroyed me. I moved into Hank's guest room, a dusty, foul-smelling cave of a space, and started from scratch. No friends, no family, no future. The college I dreamed of, gone. I got a job at a warehouse, lifting boxes for minimum wage, just to survive. I didn't talk to anyone unless I had to. I trusted no one. Eventually, I met a couple of guys my age at work. We bonded over cheap ramen and the shared misery of night shifts. One day, we pooled our paychecks and rented a tiny apartment together. It was a dump, but it was ours. I started rebuilding. 3 years passed. We upgraded jobs, moved to a better place, made plans for college. Life wasn't easy, but it was mine, honest, hard-earned, and far from the people who threw me away. Then, they reached out. An email from my dad, just one line in, and I knew everything had changed. Tessa was dying, and she finally told the truth. When I first saw the email, my chest tightened like I was 18 again, back in that room, back in that storm. It was from my dad's subject line just said, "I owe you an apology." I stared at it for a solid 10 minutes before opening it. Part of me thought it was a mistake. Spam. Maybe he hit send by accident. But when I finally opened it, it was like someone took a crowbar to my chest and cracked it wide open. He said Tessa had been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. She didn't have long. And now, suddenly, the truth mattered. Apparently, she'd told her dad everything. That I never touched her. That the accusation was a lie, one she cooked up after our argument to punish me and to pressure my parents into giving her the money I was supposed to use for college. Ray Uncle Saint, Father of the Year, was devastated. He told my parents. And now, after 3 years of silence, they wanted to talk. I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I sat on the floor of my apartment, reading that email over and over again until the words blurred. 3 years. I lost everything, and now they wanted to reconnect. My roommates, my found family, really noticed something was off. I wasn't eating, wasn't talking much. Finally, one night, I sat them down and told them everything. Until then, they only knew the surface story that I'd been kicked out by my folks over some family drama. They didn't know the real story. I told them about Tessa, about the lie, about being shipped off to live with Great Uncle Hank, the human version of a bear trap. I told them how my parents took my college fund and handed it to the person who had just accused me of a crime. They were floored. I'd have cut them off forever, Malik said, pacing. That's not family, man. That's betrayal, Jake added. And the thing is, they weren't wrong. But the worst part? I wanted to talk to my parents. Not because I missed them, but because I needed answers. Why was it so easy for them to believe her? Why did they throw me away like I was disposable? I didn't need closure. I needed the truth. So I replied, "Short message, I got your email. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm thinking about it." They responded within the hour. My mom this time. She was crying apparently. Said she couldn't sleep since hearing the truth. That they'd always hoped it wasn't true, but couldn't risk defending me without proof. Proof. The word made me laugh out loud. They had my word, but that wasn't enough. Not when their niece was crying on the floor and spinning a good story. I didn't tell them this, but their proof was a 15-second security cam clip of Tessa leaving our house in tears. No context, no audio, but that was enough for them to sell me down the river. I told my roommates everything they said, and we all sat there, trying to process it. "You should tell your side," Jake said. "People deserve to know." I knew he meant online. Reddit, Facebook, whatever platform I wanted. He wasn't wrong. I had lived in fear for 3 years, constantly wondering if someone would find out what people thought I'd done. That lie followed me, even though no one said it out loud. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was exhausted from hiding a shame that wasn't even mine. But even more than that, I felt angry. Not just at Tessa, but at the people who let her lie become reality. Who chose not to listen? Who decided silence was better than truth and shipped me off like unwanted luggage? And now that Tessa was dying, suddenly everyone wanted peace. Nah, not yet. I asked my dad for one thing: proof. I wanted it in writing. I told him if he really wanted me to believe this newfound honesty, I needed an email spelling out the truth, Tessa's confession, and an acknowledgement that they had been wrong. He sent it the next day. It was pitiful, like he was trying to lawyer his way through it. Lots of, "We didn't know better, and we believed what we saw," and Tessa's words carried weight at the time. But buried in the middle of it all was the one line that mattered. Tessa admitted she made it all up. "You didn't do anything wrong. That was enough. Not enough to forgive them, but enough to finally feel like I wasn't crazy, like my life hadn't fallen apart for nothing." That night, I printed the email and stared at it. I could finally tell my story. I could go online and post the truth, screenshots, timeline, my side of what happened, all of it. But before I did, I thought about reaching out to the people I used to be close with. Friends I hadn't seen in years, cousins who used to be like siblings. There were people I missed, people I'd pushed away because I was told to, because I thought I had no other choice. So I reached out, one by one, quietly, carefully. And the response? Overwhelming. Most of them had no idea what had happened. My parents had apparently told everyone I was dealing with trauma and needed space, that I'd asked for no one to contact me. That was a lie too. They stole my story. They stole my voice. And they used it to protect Tessa's reputation. They let everyone think I was the broken one. That I just vanished by choice. But guess what? I'm back now, and I've got a story to tell. Once I realized how many people were kept in the dark, I knew I had to speak up. My friends, my cousins, even a couple of teachers who had reached out in those first few months before my parents ghosted them on my behalf. I wasn't just erased, I was replaced with a version of me that never existed. The messed up part? People believed it. Not because they thought I was capable of something awful, but because they couldn't imagine my parents lying. That's how trust works, right? It doesn't take a knife to break it, just silence and time. So I started writing everything down, not for drama, not for attention, but because the only thing louder than a lie is the truth. Once you finally let it breathe. I laid it all out: what happened the night Tessa came over, what she accused me of, how my parents reacted, how I was sent away like trash. I even included the email my dad sent, the line that confirmed I was innocent. The one sentence I read over and over to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Tessa admitted she made it all up. Then I posted it. No names, no photos, just the story. The fallout was immediate. Old friends messaged me within hours. Some were heartbroken. Some were furious. Most of them were just shocked. They'd been told I needed space, that I'd gone through some deep emotional event and chose to cut ties. No one had told them I'd been cut off. I knew something felt off. One of my cousins wrote, "You just disappeared. I thought you ghosted us," said another. "Turns out your parents ghosted us for you." Some people were angry that I hadn't reached out sooner. But once I explained how I was forced off social media, given a burner phone, and monitored like I was on parole, they got it. My roommates were cheering in the background as the support kept rolling in. "This is justice, bro," Malik said. "No one gets to rewrite your story but you." For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was hiding under someone else's shadow. I was just me, and people were still there, still willing to believe in me. That mattered more than I realized. But not everyone was thrilled. By the next morning, I had a fresh set of messages from my parents, my uncle, and even Tessa's old high school friends, all begging me to take it down. "It's not the right time," my mom said. "She's dying. For God's sake." Uncle Ray's message was a masterpiece in guilt-tripping. He said that Tessa was repentant and deeply ashamed, and that exposing her now would only add to her suffering. "You've made your point," he wrote. "Let it go." But here's the thing. I wasn't posting to get revenge. I posted because I lived with that lie for years. It cost me everything: my education, my relationships, my peace of mind. And now that the truth was finally out, I wasn't going to bury it just because it made people uncomfortable. Tessa might have told the truth at the 11th hour, but the damage was already done. And if I had to pick between protecting her reputation or reclaiming my life, I'd pick myself. Every time. My parents didn't get it. They said I was acting out and letting anger consume me. I wasn't angry. I was free. But I did give them one chance to talk. One chance to sit down with me virtually, not in person, and say what they needed to say. Not to defend themselves. Just to acknowledge what they did. They agreed. We set up a video call. I hadn't seen their faces in 3 years. My mom cried the second I appeared on the screen. My dad looked older, smaller, like the guilt had carved lines into his face. They both apologized, kind of. It was full of, we thought we were doing the right thing and we had to protect her. But what about me? I asked. What about protecting your son? They didn't have an answer for that. They said they were scared, that the accusation was so serious they couldn't take any risks, that it was easier to believe her. And there it was. They didn't choose her because the story made more sense. They chose her because it was easier. Easier to ship me off than confront the possibility she was lying. Easier to let a good kid go than deal with a messy truth. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the silence fill the space between us like a wall. They offered to help me now, money, therapy, whatever I needed. But I didn't want any of that. What I needed, they couldn't give. 3 years ago, when I needed them most, they gave me Exile. Now that I didn't need them, they wanted to come home. I told them I appreciated the apology, but I didn't think we could go back. Not to how things were, not even close. And I ended the call. After that, I got another message from my uncle. It was short, just 4 words. You ruined her life. That one stung, not because it was true, but because I think he believed it. In his mind, Tessa's suffering was my fault, not hers, not his, mine. Because I refused to stay silent, because I refused to let a lie keep winning. But the truth? Tessa ruined her own life. She told the lie. She doubled down on it. She accepted money from my parents, my college fund, and spent it not on education, but on a year-long luxury self-discovery tour around the globe. Paris, Tokyo, Bali. Meanwhile, I was sleeping in a room that smelled like wet drywall, lifting 50-pound boxes for minimum wage. She came back broke, still refused to work. And now, facing her own mortality, she thought the truth would buy her peace. Maybe it will, but it won't come from me. Not by erasing what she did. I didn't ask for revenge. I didn't orchestrate some elaborate plan to ruin her. I just told the truth and let it do what it does best. Burn. After my uncle messaged me, you ruined her life. I just sat there staring at the screen for a while. No response. No typing indicator. Just those 4 words sitting in my inbox, like they meant something. I didn't reply, because if I had, I would have said something I couldn't take back, something ugly. And honestly, I didn't need to. He said I ruined her life, but she wrecked mine. I was the one forced to leave home. I was the one who lost my education, my family, my friends. I was the one living in someone else's basement, trying to piece my life back together with duct tape and minimum wage, all because she told one lie. And now, the same people who threw me out wanted me to put the fire out because it had finally started to burn them too. I didn't feel bad, not even a little. What shocked me, though, was how many people I hadn't spoken to in years came out of nowhere to say they'd always suspected something was off. Your parents acted weird after you left. She changed after that trip, arrogant, like she thought she was untouchable. Something about her didn't sit right with me. Over and over, I kept hearing the same thing. Nobody had all the pieces, but the ones they had never added up. And once I told my side, everything clicked. I was getting messages from relatives I hadn't even remembered. Were on Facebook. People who used to babysit me. People the first barely saw except at weddings. They were reaching out just to say, I believe you. I'm sorry I didn't sooner. Some of them even said they'd already cut ties with my parents and Uncle Ray. Said the way they handled things was disgraceful. A few even admitted they'd tried to talk to my parents after I vanished, but were told I didn't want to speak to anyone. They made it sound like you were going through something dark, one of my aunts said, but they never let us speak to you directly. Now I know why. That hit harder than I expected. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I'd always feared. That they didn't just exile me. They rewrote me, turned me into some ghost version of myself. One they could explain away with fake sympathy and vague sadness. They had an answer ready for anyone who asked. They just never had the truth. But now that truth was out in the open, And the silence that used to smother me? Gone. Replaced with something better, louder, honest. I could finally breathe again. Still, it felt weird. Freeing, yeah, but weird. I'd spent so long being invisible that being seen again almost didn't feel real. Every message from someone saying, "I'm glad you spoke up," was a reminder that I didn't imagine all of this, that I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. And yet, not a day went by without someone from the other side trying to get me to take it all down. They kept throwing the same words at me. She's dying. And sure, part of me gets it. It's not like I want her to suffer more than she already is. She's terminal. She's in pain. I understand that. But what they were asking for wasn't about peace. It was about control. They didn't want her legacy tainted. Didn't want to admit that their golden girl had a dark side. Even now, even with everything out in the open, they were still trying to clean it up. Repaint the story in soft colors, like the damage never really happened. She regrets it. She was scared. She wasn't thinking straight. I kept hearing it from everyone who stood by her. But no one ever said, "You deserved better." That was the part that made my blood run cold. Not one of them acknowledged what it felt like to be me in all of this. What it meant to lose years of my life, my name, my future, just to keep up their little illusion. They were all so focused on her shame, her pain, her regrets. No one mentioned mine. And if that sounds selfish, fine, let it be. But the truth is, I had to rebuild everything from the ground up, alone, with no roadmap, no backup, no family safety net. Tessa, she lied, then traveled the world on my college fund. While I was eating ramen with my roommates and working overnight shifts at a warehouse, she was in Thailand, finding herself. And now, after blowing through the money and coming back with nothing to show for it, except an apartment she couldn't afford, cancer came knocking. That was her wake-up call. Mine came years ago with a suitcase and a one-way ticket to nowhere. So no, I wasn't going to delete my post. I wasn't going to make a public statement saying, "She apologized privately, we're good now." Because we weren't. I didn't want revenge. But I also didn't want silence. She already had 3 years of that. 3 years where everyone believed her story, and I had to keep my head down to survive. 3 years where I paid the price for her lie, and now they wanted me to pay more just to protect her reputation in her final days. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to. And deep down, I think they knew that, because the messages got more desperate, then more aggressive, then stopped altogether. That's when I knew something had shifted. They weren't trying to talk to me anymore. They were talking about me. I got a text from one of my old friends, someone who'd reached out after seeing my post. She said Tessa's inner circle was spinning the story now, saying that I was spiteful, obsessed, even mentally unstable. The usual hits. They said I was weaponizing the truth, that I was using her illness as an excuse to get back at her. And I just sat there reading those words. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. They weren't defending her because she was right. They were defending her because they didn't want to admit they were wrong. It's easier to paint me as bitter than admit they helped ruin someone's life. But I didn't care anymore, because I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting for my own peace. And guess what? I was finally starting to feel it. After the dust settled, after the inboxes went quiet, and the guilt messages stopped trickling in, I started breathing differently. It's strange how silence can feel so different depending on who controls it. The silence I lived in for 3 years, that was prison. But this was peace. Not because everything was perfect now, but because the noise wasn't coming from people trying to bury the truth anymore. It was just life, simple, steady, real. I was still working, still sharing an apartment with the same 2 guys who'd become more like brothers than roommates. Still saving money. Still thinking about college, even if I hadn't taken the leap yet. But something inside me had changed. Something I didn't fully notice until one weekend, out of nowhere, I got a message from the same friend who first reached out after I posted my story. "Hey, everyone's getting together next weekend. We'd love to see you if you're up for it." I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to say no. I hadn't been back to my hometown since the day I left. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't scared of going back. I was scared of what it might stir up. Memories, anger, old ghosts. But I wasn't that version of me anymore. I asked my roommates what they thought, half hoping they'd talk me out of it. Instead, they offered to come with me. Not to babysit, Jake said. Just so you don't walk into that alone. So we planned it. Just a weekend. No announcements. No reunions with the people who burned me. Just the people who remembered me for me and wanted to see the version of me who made it through the fire. We drove down Friday night. I hadn't realized how much had changed until I saw the skyline again, small town silhouettes lit up against the dark, looking almost unfamiliar. It felt like a place frozen in time. Everything looked the same, but I knew I was different now. We stayed at my old friend Nolan's place. He wouldn't let me get a hotel, even though I offered like 3 times. His exact words were, "You've slept in a rat hole warehouse basement. You're not paying to sleep now." Classic Nolan. The weekend was healing. There's no other word for it. We didn't talk about the scandal. We didn't sit around rehashing the past like some courtroom drama. We just lived, laughed, played games, ate way too much food. I got to meet new partners, hear new life updates, and feel something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. It didn't matter that I'd been gone for 3 years. It didn't matter that we'd lost touch. These were people who still saw me as me, not the accused, not the exiled, not the black sheep. Just me. At one point, late Saturday night, when half the group had gone to bed, I stepped outside for air. The stars were brighter there, quieter. Jake came out a few minutes later and sat next to me on the porch. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded. "You know, you could start fresh here if you wanted. People get it now." "I know," I said. "But I don't think I need to come back. I think I just needed to know I could." That was the truth. I didn't want to move back. I didn't want to reclaim the life that got stolen. I'd built something else, something better, even if it was harder. But being here, seeing these people again, feeling that warmth, it reminded me that not everything I lost was gone forever. Some things just waited until I was ready. When I finally said goodbye on Sunday, it didn't feel like a farewell. It felt like a chapter closing. Not in a bitter way, more like a full stop after a long, painful sentence. I left with hugs, good memories, and a promise to visit again. No guilt, no ghosts, just me, walking forward. But not everything was peaceful. A week after I got home, I got another message from my mother. I hesitated before opening it. I thought I had her blocked, but I guess she found a way through. Burner number, probably. The message was short, just a few sentences. "We heard you were back in town. I'm glad people were kind. I hope it reminded you that we used to be kind too. We miss you." I didn't know how to respond, or if I even should. Because here's the thing. I don't hate my parents. I never did. Even after they betrayed me. Even after they stripped me of everything I had. I wanted to hate them, but hate requires too much energy. And I've spent enough of my life carrying emotions I didn't choose. What I feel now is distance. Not coldness, just distance. Like I finally put down something I'd been carrying too long. And now I'm not sure I could pick it back up, even if I wanted to. So I didn't reply. Not to punish them, just to protect myself. Because if I let them back in and they hurt me again, that would be on me. And I'm not ready to take that chance. Tessa, meanwhile, is still alive. Barely, from what I've heard. Hospice care, limited visitors, the whole thing. I haven't heard directly from her. I don't expect to. People keep asking if I want to see her before she goes. I don't know how to explain this without sounding cruel, but no, I don't. Not because I want her to die alone, but because I already said goodbye to the person I thought she was. The person who laughed with me when we were kids, who shared snacks and stories and secrets. That version of her died the day she chose to lie. And the version that's left the one who confessed, because she had no choice. Not because she had remorse. That's not someone I need closure from. I already got it. I got it from the friends who stood by me, from the people who reached out, from the nights I cried alone and still woke up the next day to keep going, from the job I worked to get out of a toxic house, from the guys who split rent with me when I had nothing. I got closure, not because of some dramatic final confrontation, but because I found a life outside the shadow they tried to trap me in. And I like who I am now. So no, I'm not going back. Not for one last visit. Not for one last conversation. Not even for one last apology. Some things don't need to be reopened. They just need to be released. It's strange how the worst things in your life can shape you more than anything else and still not define you. I think about that a lot now. I used to wonder what kind of person I might have been if that night never happened. If Tessa hadn't lied, if my parents had believed me, if I'd gone to college like I'd planned, kept my old friends, lived a simple, predictable life. But then I realized that version of me never existed. Not really. The person I became, the one telling this story now, only came out because I was forced to rebuild from nothing. And somehow, that feels more mine than anything that came before. I haven't heard anything new about Tessa in weeks. Last I heard, she was still breathing, still slipping, but there wasn't much time left. It's weird how that kind of news used to tie me in knots. Now it just passes through me, like wind. I acknowledge it, feel it brush past my skin, and then let it go. I'm not numb. I'm just done bleeding for people who never bled for me. My parents tried to contact me again recently. This time it was a handwritten letter. That almost broke me, I won't lie. Seeing my mom's handwriting again, something about it punched straight into my chest. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it, like it might catch fire in my hands. The letter wasn't dramatic, no big declarations, just a quiet, almost timid update. They said they respected my silence, but wanted me to know that they'd started therapy, that they'd been going weekly. Together, they admitted that they failed me. Those words were underlined. We failed you. Not we were confused. Not we were trying our best. Just a raw, honest statement that didn't make excuses. They said they'd told their side of the family the truth. No more hiding. No more he needed space. Just the truth. As it happened, they didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't try to coax me into a reunion. They just said they were sorry and that they were going to keep trying, even if I never responded. I put the letter down and cried for the first time in a long, long time. Not the kind of cry that takes you out at the knees, but the quiet kind. The kind where the tears roll without sound. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even sadness, really. It was release. That letter didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the pain or the years lost, but it felt real. It felt like the first time in years they saw me not as a problem to be solved or a reputation to protect, but as their son, the boy they turned away from when he needed them most. And that was enough for me. Not to reconnect, not to go back, but to let go of the part of me that had been holding on to their absence like it was some kind of punishment. I didn't realize how heavy that weight was until it started to lift. Now, I'm good. Not perfect. Not healed in every corner. But good. The kind of good where I wake up without a knot in my chest. Where I can plan for the future without feeling like I'm running from the past. Where I can laugh, really laugh, and not feel like I'm borrowing joy that doesn't belong to me. A few weeks ago, my roommates and I celebrated our 3rd year of living together. We went out to a rooftop bar in the city, watched the skyline shift from golden to neon, and toasted to surviving things we never thought we'd get through. "I'm proud of us," Malik said, holding up his glass. Jake nodded. "Hell yeah, no one's coming to save us. We saved ourselves." And that hit me harder than anything, because they were right. No one handed us a roadmap. No one came to clean up the wreckage. We found each other in the middle of our own storms and decided to hold on, build something better, and keep going. That's what real family looks like to me now. Not blood, choice, and I'm choosing peace. That peace doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the bad things never happened. It means carrying the lessons, not the wounds. It means owning my story, every painful, unfair, messy part of it, and not letting it own me. Sometimes I still get DMs from strangers who read my post. Some say they went through something similar. Others just say, "Thank you for speaking up, for not staying quiet, for showing that healing is possible, even if it's not perfect." One message stood out recently. It was from someone who said they'd been falsely accused too. Said they never told anyone their side because they figured no one would believe them. But after reading my story, they decided to try. They wanted to speak. That one hit me different because it reminded me why I did all this in the first place. Not for revenge, not for pity, just so the truth could exist somewhere outside of my own head, outside of the shame they tried to lock me in. Just so someone else someday might not feel so alone. And maybe that's all we can really do in the end. Tell the truth, hold it up to the light, and let it be enough. Story 2. My sister is unable to conceive. Thus, my mother is requesting that I terminate my wife's pregnancy. Her prospects of becoming a grandmother, however, are the only thing that is now ending. Despite the fact that my sister and I are 3 years apart, our mother has always treated her like a tiny princess. I guess that's why she's turned so egocentric, even now, when she is 27 years old. My wife and I are having our first kid, and I am 30 years old. After 5 years of dating and 2 years of marriage, we were ecstatic to become parents. A few months ago, we learned of the pregnancy and chose to inform our relatives before going public. The family of my wife was ecstatic about us. Naturally, though, my mom had to find something bad about it. After congratulating us, my dad said nothing more. However, my mother contacted a few hours after we broke the news to express her opinion that it was not a smart idea to carry the baby to term. I was taken aback because my mother loves kids and has always expressed excitement about having grandchildren, both at my sister's wedding and at mine. Her response was completely unanticipated. She began offering random justifications for why we shouldn't have a child at this time. When I questioned her about why she would say anything like that, she said that it would be expensive and that, because we both value our careers, it would be difficult to choose who would take care of the infant at home when we had to go back to work. I informed her that we had previously taken these factors into account and had saved up enough money to maintain a child. Since we've both been employed for a while, we are not only winging it. Both my spouse and I get paid maternity and paternity leave because we work for the same firm. When we returned to work, we had previously considered asking family members for assistance or hiring a babysitter. I knew she was holding something back, and none of her excuses sounded good enough to terminate a pregnancy. I persisted till she eventually disclosed the true cause. It was all about my sister, of course. My loving sister had apparently been trying to conceive this year as well, but she had not yet been successful. She was already feeling quite unhappy about it, and my mother believed that now was not the appropriate time for us to become parents, since it would be extremely taxing for her if we began our pregnancy adventure when she was still having difficulties. The problem is that I don't get along with my sister. When I went to college and moved out, it was a tremendous relief for both of us, because we used to fight a lot when we lived together. I don't care too much about what she thinks, including about my wife's pregnancy, because we don't get along. If she is unable to accept the reality that she is not expecting a child while we are, it is not my problem, it is hers. Naturally, though, my mother enjoys making my sister's problems everyone's concern. I then informed my mother that, although it was regrettable that my sister had not conceived yet, she had reportedly been preparing for it, and that I would not terminate my wife's pregnancy in order to spare her sorrows. I told her that it was a ridiculous notion and that, for her sake, I would act as though she had never said it. This would allow me to continue to respect her and go on. However, she persisted, claiming that my sister and her husband had failed despite their prolonged efforts. She would be devastated to hear the news of our pregnancy, and I had to consider her sentiments and decide not to proceed because it would split the family. The most concerning aspect of all of this was that my mother actually believed that ending my wife's pregnancy was a good idea only because my sister would suffer. I responded fine and hung up since I knew there was no use in arguing with her. I didn't intend to comply with her request in order to keep the talk from getting too long. I even informed my father about it after that, and I blocked her everywhere. On my mother's behalf, he apologized and said he would make sure she didn't try to get in touch with me ever again. That's my approach to it. And for the past 4 months, my father has been true to his word and stopped my mother from getting in touch with me. Life has been rather quiet and we haven't spoken to each other. We thought it was time to finally share our happiness with everyone. So we recently made the decision to publicly announce the pregnancy on social media. My sister found out that way. We wanted to share our joy with everyone. Therefore, I don't regret posting it. And we did. It's too terrible for my sister if it upsets her. She and my mother visited my home a few days ago to discuss our family and how we would go after everything that had transpired, so I know it did. Since my sister never treated me like family, I must admit that I never truly thought of her as a member of my family. We were never close, as I said. We didn't become involved in each other's lives once we moved out, since there was no obligation for us to keep in contact. We even invited each other to our weddings and would cross paths at holiday get-togethers. However, it was more out of duty. I informed my sister that I didn't consider her to be close or a member of my family since I was honest about this, and didn't think it was essential to inform her that my wife was expecting. Additionally, I was aware that she wouldn't have bothered to inform me if she had become pregnant first, and I would have learned about it from her social media posts when she finally made the announcement. Regarding my mother, I informed her that she had to lie in bed after making it because of the terrible things she had said when I told her we were expecting a child, and I didn't want that sort of negativity in my life. I informed them that I would need time to comprehend everything, even if they were present to apologize and make apologies. I wasn't going to immediately forgive them and give them another opportunity. I didn't have the patience to deal with them at the time, so I was brutally honest with them. My sister started crying and wailing in the living room after I had done speaking. I was a little taken aback by it because I didn't anticipate her being that impacted. I didn't see why she expected me to be kind and accommodating to her when we were never close. My mother comforted her by telling her that my sister had recently been told she was infertile after nearly a year and a half of planning and trying to conceive. She was left to wait as the physicians were unable to determine the cause of her infertility. She thought she was already prepared to become a mother. Thus, it was devastating for her. At the moment, however, it was not physically possible. A few weeks ago, I blogged about my wife's pregnancy, and she was distraught to learn. For 2 reasons, that made matters worse. First, she failed to conceive despite her best efforts. We were celebrating our first pregnancy at the time. She was naturally resentful and unhappy about that. The second reason was that she realized how far apart we had grown because of our personal differences and had to use social media to learn that her own brother was expecting a child. She wanted to make an effort to patch things up between us now. Hearing it made me a little softer, but I was still able to maintain my position. I told her that, although I was grateful that she had gone to such lengths to attempt to mend our relationship, I still needed time to think things through and choose whether or not I wanted to pursue our relationship further. I also expressed my sincere sympathy for her infertility and my hope that she would eventually become pregnant. But for now, I was solely concerned about my wife and our child, so I couldn't put anybody else's demands ahead of mine. Later, everything else could be worked out. I requested them to go and told them I would think it over and get in touch with them later, since I didn't have the emotional capacity to handle both my mother and sister at the same time. But for the time being, I thought it was preferable to maintain the status quo from the previous several years. Knowing that there was a lot of tension between us, I felt that I was being fairly fair since I honestly couldn't manage both of them. Even if they had apologized, I wasn't in the mood to act like nothing was wrong. In addition to my sister's years-long estrangement, my mother's remarks were terrible. It would take a lot of work to mend our connection, and I wasn't ready to put in that effort just yet, particularly because I wanted to concentrate on my wife, who was expecting. They both took offense, accusing me of being narcissistic for not forgiving them and acting as though I was too busy for them, even though I felt this should be clear. I wasn't acting busy. In reality, I wanted them to go as soon as possible, since I had to take my wife to a regular checkup and didn't want to be late. When they were offended, I was honestly too busy for them. I was also annoyed because I didn't believe I had said anything to cause them to behave in that manner. By arguing with them, I believed I had been being courteous and completely reasonable. I didn't even want to get involved because they were also postponing my wife's doctor's appointment. I didn't think I was being selfish, but I simply kept asking them to leave without bothering to refute any of their charges. They went on to say that all they wanted was to be involved in my child's life. My child would now be deprived of the affection of an aunt and grandmother due to my extremely self-centered and conceited actions. My sister informed me that because of my inflated ego, I was not only hurting my wife but also my future children by trying to salvage our relationship and refusing to forgive them. It was really offensive to be told that I was going to do something that would not be good for my child. I eventually lost my temper and replied at that point. I started by telling them that I honestly didn't think their presence in my child's life would change anything, because my child would still be loved. My mother had literally told me to end pregnancy a few months prior so that her daughter could have her moment without anyone overshadowing her. So I explained to them that I didn't think it was harmful to keep them out of my child's life. My sister had mistreated me in the past, and I had no intention of forgiving her at this time. I was even more convinced that I was right to deny them a role in my baby's life after seeing their response. They would have respected it if they had been decent people with common sense. They started making me the villain because they weren't prepared to face the possibility that they would not be engaged in my child's life, which was really their fault, even though I told them I needed time to think things out and wasn't ready to forgive them. My wife had to intervene after the disagreement got out of hand. She'd stayed in our room until then because she didn't have the energy to deal with my mother, sister, and the drama they were causing. I'd asked her to stay out of it because I didn't want her to feel stressed, but everything got so loud and confrontational that she finally had to come out to ask my mother and sister to leave. That upset me a lot because the last thing I wanted was for my wife to be stressed, and that's exactly what they did. I felt terrible for her and extremely angry at my mother and sister. So I finally decided to respond once and for all. And I think I said something I can't take back, which makes me feel awful. They were shouting at me over my wife's request for them to leave, calling me selfish, telling me I was letting my ego get in the way of a happy family, and that my child would be unfortunate to have a narcissistic father like me. I replied that at least I'd be able to have a child, which is more than I could say for my sister. I pointed out that she was only here because she knew she was infertile and now wanted a relationship with her future niece or nephew so she could try to fill a parental role, which is just pathetic. And to my mother, I responded that the only reason she was here was to fuel her daughter's illusions. I told her she was an even larger failure as a mother than my sister since, despite having 2 kids, she'd failed both of us. This was all her fault. My statements had a great impression on them, and they fled quickly afterward, but not without flinging a few obscenities my way. Even my wife was astonished by what I'd said. She told me she didn't necessarily disagree with what I'd said, but that it must have been incredibly terrible for them to hear it. Naturally, I feel bad about saying all that since I'm not the type of person who enjoys hurting people, but I felt like I had to say something because they were making me out to be the bad person, and I didn't want them to get away with it. So, am I the bad guy for having replied to my mother and sister by referencing my sister's infertility and telling my mother she failed as a parent? Update 1, I had that dispute with my mother and sister around 3 days ago, and since then the only people I've talked it with are my wife and my father. They both share very much the same opinion. What I said was a bit harsh and obviously excessive, but considering the circumstances, it was entirely fair. I said it in the heat of the moment, and it's enough that I feel horrible about it, but I don't need to apologize. It's not like my mother and sister have apologized to me for anything they've said. The fight was actually started by them. None of this would have occurred if they had gone when I requested. However, they decided to remain and dispute, which made me feel even more pressured. And that's why I said those words in the end. Even though I feel horrible about what I said, after they left, it's a comfort that the people I care about the most don't think I'm wrong for saying it. My mother has been complaining about me for days, but I'm not sure whether my sister mentioned anything about me. My father has been attempting to calm her down, despite her constant complaints. However, that merely exacerbates her rage. I believe he's supporting my inappropriate actions. She's been doing the exact same thing with my sister all along, and I don't understand why she doesn't realize that it's likely the cause of my sister's behavior. My mother feels that I should apologize profusely to her and my sister since they were only attempting to support me, and I unjustly painted them as the bad guys. That's funny since I feel the same way about them. I suppose it's simply my word against theirs at this point. In any case, the fact remains that I will not be apologizing to them since they deserved what they received. I wouldn't have snapped at them if they hadn't shoved me. It's that easy. My marriage will be my top focus, as I already stated. I'll also make an effort going forward to avoid becoming upset about these little matters. Second update, I had the argument with my mother and sister a little more than a week ago. I was just discussing it with my wife and father in an effort to keep things secret, but they didn't seem to care about that. They made things public and shared a post about me on social media, omitting all context and just stated what I had said. I'm not making this up. Nothing about what they said or what initially sparked the disagreement was included. Only a line about my remarks was included. The rest of the family, of course, began calling and messaging me after that to let me know that it was inappropriate for me to say such things to my family and that they had expected better of me because people couldn't believe I was capable of uttering those things. Many even questioned whether it was true. The fact that they posted it before contacting them astounded me. My father told me that even he was shocked that they had done it. So far, he had been unsuccessful in persuading them to take down the post. I was so upset that they had done that I made the decision to act. I made the decision to provide the true account of what transpired that day after consulting with my wife. I explained the true situation so that everyone would at least comprehend if they were going to go to others for pity, even if I didn't dispute that I had stated what my mother and sister had accused me of. I would ensure that everyone was aware of the complete truth. I explained their visit, my mother's remarks on my wife's pregnancy months prior, and the main cause of the dispute the day after I posted, and it was viewed by others. They began offering support and comments. Many individuals apologized and said they had been quick to criticize me, but they weren't sure which side to support now that they understood the whole story. I'm okay with that since I know my actions weren't nearly as horrible as theirs. I didn't even require support from others. I would have been the first to post if I wanted everyone to feel sorry for me. I just made the clarifications to avoid needless hostility from targeting us. However, I don't believe my sister and mother comprehend that idea. Since we each presented our sides a few days ago, they have been accusing me of being attention-seeking, which, oddly, describes them rather than me. They believe that my remarks were offensive regardless of the situation, and that their behavior did not warrant the kind of response they got from me. However, I doubt the rest of the family feels that same. In any case, I'm happy I could provide my perspective. 3 days have gone by since I last posted, and when I checked my social media and messages today, I saw that a number of individuals had informed me that my sister and mother had taken down their postings regarding what had happened. They must have been compelled to remove them once they began to receive a lot of criticism from the rest of the family. I would share it in my defense, since I don't believe anyone believed their story, that I was only trying to get pity and attention. Everyone else concurred that, despite the fact that what I had said was incorrect, it was partially justifiable given the situation. I considered it a major victory when they removed their posts because they were unable to cope with the demand. I want to leave my own post up for a few more days in case they do something amusing, so I haven't taken it down yet. A few days ago, not long after I shared my side of the tale, another noteworthy event occurred. We haven't spoken much because I'm not close to my sister and her husband, so my brother-in-law messaged me. His message that he knew his wife would never apologize to me was a welcome surprise. Since he had only heard her version of the tale, he didn't believe she had any motive to do so up until now. However, after reading mine, he was unsure of what to believe. He wanted to apologize on her behalf in case what I had said was accurate, but he requested me to keep this between ourselves. She had been extremely sensitive ever since discovering that she would probably experience infertility and that a natural pregnancy without IVF was not feasible. The tone of his message made it clear that he was suffering through a lot, and I truly felt sorry for him. I reassured him that everything was okay and expressed my gratitude that he had at least tried to apologize. He seems like a really good man. I'm not sure how he got together with my sister, but I've been true to my word and only discussed this with you. That doesn't, in my opinion, violate the guarantee. My last update was a few weeks ago, and I recently made the decision to remove my post. It had been up long enough, in my opinion, and everyone was aware of the reality by now. Additionally, I believe that my mother and sister were already punished enough for who they are as individuals, and that I didn't need to punish them further. My sister and her husband are now going through a divorce, according to my father, who I talked with a few days ago. She had been acting utterly out of character ever since she discovered she had reproductive problems. She has consistently been overly pampered, entitled, and, to be honest, a little out of balance. However, she had recently become unbearable. She apparently became really poisonous. Her spouse had tried his best to tolerate it, but he'd had enough following a recent dispute. She then returned to live with my parents. Since then, there has been constant turmoil at my father's place. I'm sorry for my dad. My mother has been blaming her husband for everything that went wrong, which has reinforced the idea that my sister can never be wrong. She is obviously trying her hardest to make sure her daughter doesn't feel bad. My dad has to cope with all of this, and it just breaks my heart. My sister just learned she is unable to conceive, and now her husband is divorcing her, so I even feel a little sorry for her. I'm not that callous, but the second half is undoubtedly her fault. I thus made the decision to remove my post. However, since I'm fairly certain they haven't changed, I won't apologize for anything, and I won't contact them. In fact, my father has been telling me that I should have been the one responsible for a lot of stuff, rather than my brother. There is a lot of talk about the pregnancy in their home. Therefore, the first believe it would be best if we avoided one other. My wife is my top priority, as always, and I'm content, as long as she's content. That must indicate that I'm feeling really content at the moment. The fifth update. I want to start by saying that I am now a father, and that my wife and I have a gorgeous, plump little boy. I'm obviously biased because I'm a new father, but it's hard to deny how wonderful he is. We are ecstatic, and to be honest, that's all that matters at the moment. Our households. My wife and I have been traveling to meet the newest family member, almost the entire family, excluding my sister and mother. Things between us are the same, as you can imagine, and I'm not going to change that. Naturally, my sister hasn't expressed any interest in her nephew's birth since I have my son. I'm not shocked in the least. Actually, I'd prefer not to deal with her at this joyful time in my life, so it's a relief. She has reportedly been whining and making an effort to minimize the baby. But my dad is the only one who has to put up with her negativity, because she still lives at my parents' house. We haven't been impacted at all, and we honestly don't give a damn about what she says or does. Her absence is more advantageous than detrimental. In contrast, my mother seems to have suddenly realized that she is my mother, and that she is now a grandmother. Ever since the baby was born, she has been pleading with my dad to act as a mediator between us, so she can meet her grandson. Thankfully, though, my dad has stood his ground and informed her that he does not wish to become involved. He is quite familiar with our response. Our son will not meet her. After everything she's done, I'm not sure what she expected, particularly after I advised my wife to end the pregnancy. She mentioned it in a casual way, as though she were recommending a different restaurant, because my sister disliked seafood. It was ludicrous, callous, and a contributing factor in the irreparability of our relationship. I'm aware that my sister's life isn't going well, but I don't feel sorry for her. She recently finalized her divorce. Thus, you can only imagine her misery. She should start looking for a new place to live, according to my father. Additionally, my mother has not adopted the recommendation. Well, he wasn't joking. It seems my father has finally reached his limit after enduring her behavior for so long. Imagine what it must be like for him, tolerating her attitude now that things aren't going her way. So that's everything. I've tried to keep this brief so I can get back to my son. Story 3. I connected a tracker that I had discovered in my automobile to a freight truck that was going to Canada. However, I just got one of the most bizarre calls ever. Have you ever found yourself in a scenario when your thoughts suddenly leap to an impossibility because you just can't believe it and it's ridiculous? Well, I need your assistance if you have gone through this or something similar. I'm in a situation where I'm unsure of whether to turn right or left, and both seem like poor decisions. My wife is starting to give me suspicions about something that isn't possible. It's not infidelity either. Although most entries discuss cheating, which is a common issue here, I doubt that's the case in my instance. Otherwise, I hope not. I don't know what's happening. Let me clarify the situation. I'm Mark, and I've been blissfully married to Melissa for a number of years. Despite her problems, she is a wonderful partner and brings me immense joy. I also make an effort to do the same for her. I work at a great job too. The only drawback is that I have to travel frequently. But since I am paid well, it's a simple trade-off, isn't it? Not for my wife, however. This is a result of her extreme suspicion and paranoia. But when we first started dating, she wasn't like this. Melissa and I became fast friends when we first met in college. Other than Liam, my childhood best friend, she was the only person I felt safe discussing intimate information with. Melissa and I progressively became closer, and Liam and I went everywhere together. We just started dating one day. She appeared to be perfect at that time in my life, which was a little unsettling since it suggested she may be concealing something. But because of how long we've been friends, I assumed I would have figured out if she was hiding anything. We really got married and moved in together a few years later. In case you were wondering, Liam is still my closest buddy. He lives close by and is married. Thus, my friendships endure. Anyway, let's get right to the subject. After a few months of our marriage, I began to realize that Melissa was, in fact, a highly suspicious person. She didn't attempt to disguise it, and when I questioned, she told me straight out that she was insecure and that she was afraid someone would take me away from her since I traveled so often. I won't tell lies. Having a paranoid wife might be a little frustrating, but it can also be charming. In my opinion, she cannot tolerate even a little moment without me. She therefore always wants to know where I am and what I'm doing. I won't claim it's simple because, as I previously stated, there are instances when it becomes so bothersome that we argue because I didn't answer her phone and she becomes upset with me. However, you may have a positive connection as long as you keep in mind that she acts out of love. However, it just won't work unless the person in my position is really patient. To be honest, I don't think this marriage would have survived if it had been someone else. My wife agrees when I make jokes about how fortunate she is to have me. My life generally goes like that. I go to work, and they tell me where I have to go, and for how many days that week, both for my wife and myself. I get her to chuckle while she acts unhappy. However, this week was unique. Melissa was plainly upset that I would be gone for 2 days, when I learned a few days earlier that I would need to drive a considerable distance for a client meeting. She acts like a child when she's unhappy, so I have to work hard to persuade her. She does this because she knows I like having to convince her, and she knows I have to go. We had a great day after I promised to take her to her favorite restaurant for supper, and she eventually consented. I departed the next day. I checked into my hotel and held the meeting that same afternoon. A coworker who had been at the meeting with me phoned me the next day as I was getting ready to depart to report that he had misplaced his ring and was concerned that he might have left it in my car. He had already gone back to work because he was from a neighboring branch. I stopped at a petrol station and began looking around for it after telling him I would check and give him a call back. I found something really fascinating beneath an area I never would have looked unless I was looking for a little object, but I didn't locate the ring, which my coworker subsequently informed had dropped somewhere else. I discovered a little gadget that oddly resembled a tracker. Even though it was deep beneath the seat, I initially merely made a guess because there was nothing else that may be the source. It couldn't have fallen there by accident. I was somewhat shocked to see it firmly in place. If I were a significant individual or anything, I could understand, but I'm not. Since I travel there for business, my employer is constantly aware of my whereabouts, therefore there's no need to follow me. My wife has no excuse because she always knows where I am. Furthermore, my automobile is only accessible by the two of them. Liam does, of course, but he has even less justification for doing so. So, just to be sure, I checked up exactly what it was. Furthermore, it was unquestionably a tracker. The tracker truly frightened me after the initial shock. For what reason would someone want to know my location, given that I knew it couldn't be a relative? I received the impression that whomever had planted the tracker did so with the intention of hurting me, my family, my business, or doing something similar. I realized that making such an assumption seems a little foolish, but can you really blame me? It's not common to place a tracker on someone after they've been frightened. I reasoned that deceiving the person who was following me for a day would be the best course of action. I reasoned that I would bring my wife into it by going home if I was in any immediate danger. I informed the business that I would be back tomorrow, since I was having some problems. I drove around for a bit to check whether anyone was following me, after telling my wife I had additional work. Since I never imagined that I would experience something like this, I used everything I had seen in movies and similar circumstances. After a time, I was certain that no one was pursuing me, so I returned to the hotel to consider how amazing it was that I was being followed by someone I didn't even know. How was the tracker positioned then? I am the only one that touches my automobile, my dearest buddy and my wife. The person who cleans it is my wife. She liked cleaning, so she does it. Therefore, it was obvious to me that someone couldn't put it there, and nobody would notice. My wife called to ask me where I was when I was considering this. That was really odd since I had clearly messaged her before, and even though she's paranoid, she would often simply understand. But all of a sudden, she began to question me, accusing me of lying, and she kept asking me where I was going. I had just put away a tracking gadget, so this looked somewhat strange. You see, I had demonstrated to her during a video conversation that I remained at the hotel. She only partially believed me after that. I became skeptical of her because she may have installed a tracker in the car, since she didn't trust me. Furthermore, she is the only person I believe could pull it off without me noticing. However, I've never done anything to increase her mistrust, so she has no need to go that far, making it one of the most ridiculous things. In addition, my devoted wife would never do this because she would consider my reaction if I found out. She has absolutely no faith in me. The thought that it's my wife bothers me now. I made the decision to move on and head home. I didn't bring my automobile home to see what would happen, though. I went home after dropping it off at a friend's place. My wife became quite upset with me and insisted that I be honest with her. She didn't accept that my automobile had broken down and spent a few days in the repair. The fact that she didn't even pause to consider whether or not I was lying is what most perplexes me. After all these years, you would think she would be able to tell when I'm lying. She just had to not believe me, though, since it seemed like she already knew, even if I'd rather not think about it. I'm much more wary of her now because of this. However, I don't want to think she's capable of doing this. If she is, that indicates that she has absolutely no faith in me, even after being fully aware of me for so many years. Tell me what I should do, people, please. Update 1. 2 weeks have gone by since my previous post, and I did indeed make a choice. I'm not sure whether that was the correct decision, but given what just transpired, it seems more and more to me that I should have let this all go when I had the opportunity. I believe I've roused a bear that will ruin our relationship. Let me clarify. I had a lot of thoughts. I don't mean a day or two either. For a week, my decision was always on my mind. My wife's rage subsided a few days after I posted. She expressed regret for her actions and explained that she was only concerned because her gut told her something had occurred. I told her that nothing had happened when she asked me again. She then requested that I return the automobile. I did, and she appeared a little taken aback. When my wife got upset with me, it was now simpler to distrust her. Suspecting something like this, however, became much more difficult as soon as she returned to her loving self. I always felt terrible when I thought about the potential that she was responsible for this. I was on the verge of telling her everything on many times, but I felt compelled to look into it more. I gave it a lot of thinking and concluded that I needed to learn more. However, the issue was that I'm not suited for investigative work. I was aware that no matter how closely I followed hints, I would never find anything. I called a buddy I made at work because of this, the private investigator, Dave. I frequently sought Dave's assistance with work-related issues. I thus believed that he would be the most suitable person to inquire about the situation. We met after I got in touch with him. He warned me, which frightened me a little. He informed me that since he may discover anything, I should be ready to deal with the repercussions as soon as he realized this was a personal matter. I told him everything that had transpired and agreed. He listened, then repeated the warning to me. He asked me again if I was sure, and stated he was certain I wouldn't like what we were about to find. I won't tell lies. I was much more frightened after his second warning. He seemed to be saying so just because he was certain my wife was involved, in my opinion. He is, after all, the only one who might possibly have a better suggestion in this circumstance. But since I believe it's better to know than to stay in the dark, I told him to go ahead. However, a week later, I'm kind of regretting it since it appears like it's more than just my wife's concerns. He told me over the phone today that he needed a few more days. He said that while he already had nearly everything, there were still a few missing parts, which he wanted to finish before telling me. He then advised me to brace myself for heartbreaking news till he did. This proved that my wife done this, which made me very upset. Therefore, the first informed Dave that I was ready to hear that. However, Dave just hung up the phone after telling me that it was far worse than any of us had anticipated. I'm terrified to learn the truth, and based on his response, I'm very certain that our relationship may be over. When Dave informs me what's going on, I'll update you. The second update. Everyone, oh my God. Dave was spot on. The facts he provided me with caught me off guard. Prepare to be astonished if you were among those who backed my wife. My last update was a couple weeks ago. Dave invited me to meet around a week after I finished the last one. He said he was sorry for what he was going to tell me, and I was trembling at the time because I was so afraid. He then revealed to me that my closest buddy, Liam, was also complicit in the tracking, in addition to my wife. I was first perplexed until he said that the two were sharing a bed, and that the tracker was supposed to always know where I was so they could get away with it. I was taken aback. I was unable to talk at all. Dave continued to speak. He claimed that while he was unsure of the duration of this, he assumed it had been at least a year. I started weeping as soon as he showed me pictures of them sharing a kiss in Liam's car. You don't know. I have the utmost faith in these two individuals. I consider Liam's wife to be like a sister, and we are almost family. It seemed unbelievable to me. My best buddy also did this, in addition to my wife. Dave went on to say that he wasn't done. Sadly, there was more terrible news to come. My wife had been saying for a few months that she wanted the house where my parents reside to be given to her. I purchased my parents a large old house as soon as I started earning money, and Melissa and I moved in together when I got married. I got it from them. Melissa desired the large house, so I offered to move our house into her name. She stated that she had no intention of relocating there. All she wanted was to possess it. She gave the impression that it had to do with fairness, because I never imagined that we would part ways, and since we each own a home, I concurred. I never gave it another consideration after telling her that we would do it in a few months. She presumably didn't want to raise suspicions, so she didn't remind me. According to Dave, she intends to seize the house, evict my parents, and then abandon me. My wife isn't like that, so I couldn't trust him. I had to trust it, though, when he played a recording that wasn't very clear. To be honest, I might not have believed him if none of this had occurred, but there was nothing else I could do, because I had already learned so much. Dave then questioned me about my next course of action. I told him I didn't know I was going to consider it, but I had already made up my mind that I wouldn't let her and Liam to get away with it so simply. They simply played me, but I treated them as if they were my own family. I can't even express how painful it is to learn the truth, yet I would have taken a bullet for any of them, you know. I believe you may see why I chose to get retribution. I then play little recorders after that. We have the ones Dave suggested in our cars and throughout the house. Additionally, these recorders are excellent. In order to gather as much proof as possible, I also installed several covert cameras. I have a straightforward plan. I'm planning to give my wife the house by fabricating paperwork. She will undoubtedly act quickly to carry out her strategy after that, and I'm going to publicly expose her and my closest buddy when she does. Update 3. I'm now able to offer some positive news. Since my previous update was more than 2 months ago, I'll get right to the point. I had all I needed a week after my last update. I then informed my wife that I had arranged for her to inherit the house. When my wife recalled me a few days later, I informed her that I had already made the arrangements and began the process of giving her the house. She appeared content throughout the entire procedure when I delivered her the house and signed the fictitious documents. It had been weeks since I had seen Liam. I made myself go out with him one night, since it was becoming strange. Every second was terrible. However, I did it because I knew I would eventually have my retribution. After a few weeks of waiting, my wife carried out her plan just as I had anticipated. She went to my parents' house and evicted them, saying the house was hers and she was leaving me. Of course, I pretended that I had no idea what she was doing. Together with my parents and hers, I called my in-laws and proceeded to address her. I also gave Liam a call and requested him to assist me clean up the mess at my mother's house. I knew his wife was with him at the time, so he had to accompany her. Let me tell you, Liam and my wife were both really pleased, as they were unaware that I had a little surprise planned and a perfect strategy. When our dad and I got to the house, my wife started telling a victim narrative when Melissa's mother questioned her about what she was doing. According to her, I was a bad spouse who constantly drank and slapped her whenever I felt like it. She also claimed that, despite her desire to have children, I had her get rid of infants. She made care to explain to everyone why she had deceived me into giving her the house and why she was now abandoning me. She gave off the impression that she was Oscar-worthy, and Liam and his wife showed there just in time. Melissa was actually pregnant with her buddy Liam's wife, and it was all a part of their larger scheme. I asked Melissa what she was doing while continuing to behave as though I knew nothing. No, this is a lie, I informed everyone. Then Liam came out and told our relatives that he had seen some of those things and that Melissa was speaking the truth. He said that even though he loved me, he was powerless to stop me from turning into a monster when she pleaded for his assistance. They did it rather well again, I must say, and the family appeared to be persuaded at that point. What do you know? I begged them to disclose the truth, or I would, since I felt that was enough drama. Naturally, they refused to compromise. I thus explained to everyone that Liam and Melissa were having an affair and that this was all part of their scheme. Seeing them be perplexed was hilarious because I had no way of knowing this. Then I revealed the facts including footage of the meeting behind my back, recordings, and even pictures of them kissing. Additionally, Dave provided me with a ton additional proof, which was really helpful. As soon as it began, I had overwhelming evidence, so my role was all but finished. Melissa. His parents simply gazed at her in shock, and her mother immediately struck her when she attempted to defend herself. Liam was trying to speak to his wife at the time when he was hit as well. I informed Melissa that we were finished and that the documents were a fabrication. She broke down in tears. Melissa was informed by my mother-in-law that she was severing her ties to the family and that she would not be seeing her again. I informed her that the divorce papers will be sent to her shortly. Liam became enraged with me and attempted to strike me after his wife informed him that they were also done. I took hold of him and slung him to the ground. Liam was taken into custody when my father phoned the police, and despite Melissa's persistent pleading, we expelled her from the house. I informed my mother-in-law it wasn't her fault at all, and she is now apologizing to me. Melissa was there to plead with me when I arrived home, claiming she had nowhere to go. I don't care, I told her. We are currently in the midst of divorce procedures, and it has been over a month since then. In addition, Liam's wife filed for divorce and moved out. It's not going well for Liam. This is unbelievable. A week ago, he reached out to me for assistance. He pleaded with me, an old acquaintance, to assist him in paying the expenses. He didn't deserve the title of buddy, I informed him. I allowed him to suffer when even adversaries would have done less. Melissa attempted to rejoin her family when I last heard from her, but no one took her in. She was no longer a member of the family, and her parents made it extremely evident to everyone. She then moved in with some friends, but they were unable to provide her with much support and expelled her after a few weeks. She's essentially homeless now. In any case, I'm all right, as good as anyone can be in my position. Update 4. I am providing this update solely in response to inquiries about my life and whether or not I have finalized the divorce. Indeed, things appear to be improving, particularly now that I'm not legally bound to that woman. I've had the best 3 weeks in a long time since the divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. If Liam was already struggling financially, it's much worse now that he has to pay alimony because his and his wife's divorce ended before mine. Since my ex-wife informed me during one of the divorce hearings that she no longer saw Liam and that we could start over, I am aware that he has attempted to reunite with her. We would start over, but on our own paths, I retorted. She began sobbing loudly, and her lawyer had to comfort her while she stared at me like I was the bad guy in this whole situation, which I thought was funny. I followed my lawyer's advice and spoke with her as little as possible. I don't understand why my ex-wife believes that we can reconcile just because she told me she no longer sees him. I don't want this divorce to be about that. All I want is to leave her. And because I didn't see the signs, I know that many people have called me naive. For example, my ex-wife used to control me when I traveled. That should have been the first indication to leave this marriage, according to many. Let me tell you something though. These things are difficult for people on the spectrum to see because they are easier for me to read. I find it easier to work with computers and servers, which is what I do, especially when I travel. As you can see, I couldn't have been good at negotiating and reading people's intentions anyway, so that's what I chose to do while I was in college. I have no desire to defend myself. I simply wanted to explain why I haven't found all of this to be so simple. I have lived with it my entire life, though I wish it could be different. I could go on and on about people who have exploited that, but I'd be deviating from my main point at this point. At least I'm not so naive as to think that everyone will be kind to me and that everything will be simpler, even though I still wish that people wouldn't take advantage of it. My own wife, who had vowed to love and be faithful to me, betrayed me in a way I didn't anticipate. My expectations have therefore significantly decreased. Although I can't guarantee it won't happen again, I won't deny that this has happened to me numerous times in my life. Since Liam is one of the most frequently asked questions in my posts, I don't want to wrap up this story without addressing him. And although I've already said he lost the case, at least in terms of alimony, I wanted to add that he's living in a pretty bad place. Or at least that's what his ex-wife told me. She and I have been in communication throughout this process, since I had much of the information she used for her divorce. This has allowed me to know what's happened with him. I can also tell you that she's already met someone, and from what she told me, Liam hasn't been too happy to find out this news. Apparently, after everything blew up, he asked his ex-wife for forgiveness several times, but she like me, didn't accept it. As for whether my ex and Liam are together now, I don't know. There's no one who can tell me anything about it, since I don't talk to my ex, and Liam's ex-wife doesn't know either. Edit. That's right. I forgot to mention the outcome of the divorce with my ex. Well, she didn't have to pay alimony, and the house I gave my parents was in their name. Also, the house that was originally my parents' I was going to inherit at some point, so she couldn't claim that either. In short, she left with very little from our marriage due to her infidelity.